I can clear up a couple of things for Senator Bernardi. Well, just for a moment, Senator Bernardi, I appreciate that. This matter has been now lingering around this place for multiples of weeks, and I think without directing my attention to Senator Bernardi, I think there's been adequate time for any senator to be able to explore all sides of this equation to make their mind up about whether they should or shouldn't support this disallowance motion. And indeed, reference to the report that Senator Williams has spoken about would clearly have articulated. I mean, that was a massive inquiry. There was people who've been here. Senator McDonald, who's the father of the Senate, told me he'd never been at a Senate hearing with as many stakeholders present. In Townsville, there were over 350 in a massive hall who just attended to observe the conduct of the inquiry, made up of millers. All the millers were there, and all the growers were there. So that would have aided. But the reason, can I say, Senator Bernardi, the reason this was brought on today is this has been continuing to cause great angst back in this industry that had nearly 3 years where people weren't able to plan. Planning around sugar is a big deal. You've got to make a decision now over a 5-year business plan. So the investment that you make this season will have impacts on your business operations for 5 years. After 3 years of uncertainty, which was stabilised with the application of the code, there was a massive sigh of relief across cane growers in my home state, where largely the production is in this country. I know Senator Williams has cane production in the northern part of New South Wales, but it's largely in the state of Queensland. There was a huge sigh of relief, and I mean in their thousands. I've been here nearly 4 years now, and I've never had so much correspondence and traffic, phone calls, contact events made over an issue as I did over sugar. 4,500 families on average, something like 67 small communities who, if the sugar industry is disrupted, it will disrupt their economies and their social circumstances right across my home state. Small communities, some of them only with a couple of hundred residents. So this instability that run from you could probably argue somewhere north of the Tweed, up through Childers, and then a breakthrough to production areas around Serena and Mackay, and then all the way up the coast, almost all the way to Cairns. So all of those small coastal communities on the eastern side of the Great Divide, there is not one of them that would not be affected, would not have been affected by this continued instability in the sugar industry. Now, look, we don't even need to return to our contemporary inquiry to understand why this became necessary. There was a Royal Commission in this country in 1932, I think it was, into the sugar industry because the sugar industry was not developing. And that was because of the concern of the power imbalance of millers with respect to this particular commodity. And I just want to pick up and elaborate further on a couple of points made by Senator Williams. This commodity has to be harvested in a very short period of time, measured in weeks. It's not as if you can just throw the crop in and I'll come back off holidays in January and I'll take the crop off, or that doesn't suit me, I'll wait till Easter, or any of the other rotations that can occur with other commodities. And once it's harvested, it has its life, productivity is measured in hours, not even days. And what happens to it, it goes onto this little flimsy carriage on a little flimsy rail line, and it can only go to one place. That's the mill. Now, it can't be stored. It's not efficient to transport it by any other method to another mill, and even if you could, you are likely, in my home state of Queensland, to arrive at another mill owned by the same miller you were trying to avoid 60 kilometres down the road. So this is, you know, I had some of the colleagues want to talk to me about free market. Well, I'm a free marketeer to a certain extent. I'm not going to make out that I'm a total free marketeer, but I don't mind protected markets. But the thing you need to be able to make decisions around a free market is a free market. And there is no free market with respect to this sugar. So what the Royal Commission almost 100 years ago, 70-something years ago, decided was this principle of economic interest. So the relationship between the miller and the grower, and it didn't matter that the mills were sometimes cooperatively owned by the growers. This principle of economic interest was the safeguard. Now, when this mob come along, of course, they made undertakings when they come through the Foreign Investment Review Board that they weren't going to disturb these marketing conditions that had prevailed and operated successfully in this space for all of this period of time. Well, of course, one thing I can tell you about the corporation Wilmar, they are very persistent and they are very patient. This won't end here today. This episode today with Senator Leyonhjelm, and I've got to imagine that they have persuaded him or convinced him of the merits of his activities here today. There can be no other reason. Senator Leyonhjelm didn't wake up one day in his apartment in Sydney and say, golly gee, by the end of the day I'd better fix this business around sugarcane marketing in a state that I rarely visit. And of course he won't be able to visit any longer. He won't be able to go to any beach community between Noosa and Cairns unless he's got a wig and a moustache on. Now, I wasn't even going to speak today, but I was persuaded. I listened to this in my office, and when he started to make allegations in here that were not accurate. One was that the National Party had somehow had some knee-jerk reaction with the Code of Conduct. Well, I've got to tell you, it's a pretty slow operating knee, because it started in 2014 and of course it didn't come into play until any number of years later. And the suggestion that somehow a government of which I'm involved has done some dirty deal with any crossbench, One Nation. I know that One Nation genuinely support agriculture, growers and small farmers in my home state. You couldn't put a tally-ho paper between One Nation and the National Party in their attitude to small communities, agriculture and supporting these industries and these particular economies. And it wouldn't matter what the circumstances were. It was of no surprise that One Nation themselves turned their attention to this particular issue with the sugar industry and joined us, in effect. I'm happy to say we were there because our circumstances allowed. We were there well before it. We had spent, in my case, hundreds and hundreds of hours travelling in these inquiries, poring over reports, making adjustments, changes, and I must have attended 25 or 30 meetings. And when Senator Leyonhjelm says there was no consultation, I've got to tell you, representatives of Wilmar and other mills, I couldn't even go into my bathroom. They were sitting on the bench there waiting for me in my suite. So any suggestion that we didn't talk to, listen, debate, argue with every element within industry, and I'm not just talking about cane growers and cane processors. I travel that country up there, as many do, and my colleagues here do. I've travelled it dozens of times, and this was a topic of conversation with local government, with local business associations, everybody. So every stakeholder was consulted, and we arrived at the end of the day with the decision around the mandatory code. And the mandatory code, it was mandatory as opposed to being a voluntary code, because Wilmar indicated that they wouldn't comply with the voluntary code. So it had to be made mandatory for it to have any sort of effect. So I've got to tell you, I like Senator Leyonhjelm and I've got on well with him while I've been here, but—
Senator O'Sullivan, it's just the 5th time you've said it, so I will pull you up. It's Senator Leyonhjelm.
Leyonhjelm, my apologies. I have trouble with long names. Senator Leyonhjelm, I like him and I've had a cooperation with him since I've been here, but I will not tolerate any senator coming in here and attacking our agricultural base of these great families, 4,500 of them, who have provided enormous input to the economy of my state and the economy of this nation. These are decent family men and women. You go there, this is real family communities. This is the places where the kids often work on the farm or not far away. Generational, 4 or 5 generations in the development of sugar. And I'll say to any senator that wants to attack it front on, I won't sleep until I defend these farmers at every level. And if I have to default, if someone has to be favoured, it will be the farmers. The big boys, the Wilmars, one of the biggest processors in the world, they can look after themselves. Now, when we confronted this issue, can I say, and I don't want to attack Wilmar, they're a company, and I'm always very cautious in this place not to do reputational damage to corporations. But one of the telling questions was, Wilmar wanted to enter the marketplace and have the right to sell the sugar of these growers, and they've been granted that right. So the old single desk that was around QSL was expanded. So Wilmar can, if they choose, entice the growers to allow them to market their sugar, to pick up this other premium that they think is there to be had. But why don't the sugar growers use it? Because there's been a loss of complete and absolute collapse of trust with Wilmar over the last 3 or 4 years as these dealings evolved. They don't trust them. They don't trust them. They understand that if they go off there for a fortnight, it's like having a new girlfriend and leaving the wife at home. If QSL is not there at the end of the day, we do have a single desk, a Wilmar desk, and controlling the ports and the logistics. That's when you know you've got trouble. That's when you've got farm gate. That's when you will have those little railway lines go off to the mill and come back, still full of cane. So we will be vigilant on this while ever we're in power, and we really appreciate the support of One Nation. And I have to correct my colleague Senator Williams. I think he was a bit hasty in jumping on the Greens. I don't know what the Greens will do with this vote, but there was an indication earlier today when they supported bringing this on and restoring stability into the sugar industry for sugar growers. So, look, I want to close by saying this, because I know other senators want to make a contribution. My message is to Wilmar: look straight down the barrel. You're not the only one that's patient. You're not the only one that knows how to exercise power. And I'll tell you, it's a long way between now and when you cripple our sugar industry. It's a long way between now when you get the sole power over this industry, this important industry. And the message to you is clear. And it won't matter whether I'm here or not, or Senator Hanson and her colleagues, or Senator Williams is here. Our side of politics will continue to protect the interests, the integrity of industries that are so important to so many thousands of our families, so many hundreds of our communities, from now until the end of time. So Wilmar, I suspect, if you don't like those circumstances, pack your bags and go to Brazil or somewhere else.